Imposter syndrome says we're not authors.
But here's our books.
And here's our podcast. We are two book nerds talking about our indie author experiences
to spread the love of indie publishing and help other indies not feel alone.
Thanks for joining us, and now on to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Indie Book Nerds podcast. We are your hosts, Jade Neoma
and Morgan Christensen. And today we're super excited to welcome our guest, Atlas Creed.
Hello.
Atlas Creed made his debut in 2024 with Armitage, book one of the Children of Arcanum series, challenging genre stereotypes and blending several together for a unique story. Atlas seeks to create new worlds for readers to explore with a focus on characters, ensuring that their development resonates with readers. A quote from Atlas is, "We are not perfect, and those imperfections, as we embrace them, shape who we are."
And a little brief introduction on the book. Rebekah Daroh is dealing with the grief of losing her sister when she is confronted by a phantom that searches her mind and drags her to the realm of souls. Niko Ortez is a special agent focused on cold cases, including Rebekah's sister's case. When their paths cross, a violent storm imprisons the guests with the killer. Searching for answers, what lies in store for the budding agent and the grief-stricken young girl will change both of their lives. Content warnings include self-harm, suicide, death, gore, blood, attempted rape, cannibalism, and PTSD. For readers that need their content warnings.
Well, thank you so much, Atlas, for joining us. Will you tell us in your own words, what is your novel about and when did it release?
Okay, so I'll start with the easy answer. The release was June 6th of 2024, so just a couple months ago. As for what it's about, it follows two different streams of thought. You've got, as you mentioned, Niko Ortez and Rebekah Daroh. And Rebekah's kind of deals with the more paranormal thriller side of things and the fantasy side of things, where she starts out grieving the loss of her sister when this phantom kind of visits her, and she at first doesn't really understand what it is. Is it just a manifestation of her grief and depression, or is there something more to it? And as the story progresses, she's actually pulled into another realm entirely, and that's when things get a little bit dicier. That's when she discovers that she's got a god trapped in her consciousness who says he can help her out. She runs into elemental fauns, witches, so on and so forth, all while trying to kind of find closure over her sister's disappearance, because that's all it is at the time, although she suspects that there's something more to it. And then, of course, you've got the other side of things, Niko Ortez, and while his story is primarily focused on the cold case of Rebekah's missing sister, Nicole, as well as a slew of other ones, he's also dealing with his own, career issues, his own self-doubt, relationship problems, so on and so forth. So it's a very layered story on many fronts. It tackles a lot of heavy topics. But yeah, the primary focus is this crime mystery that's kind of the nexus for everything that the two characters are focused on.
Yeah, I can definitely see how there are a lot of different layers to that story. You definitely touch on a lot of different things. Well, tell us what inspired the book.
So, I originally started out just kind of testing the waters of getting back into writing. I was writing or conceptualizing this fantasy story back in high school. I had characters, loose ideas, stuff like that, and it just kind of fell apart. So years later, I started testing the waters of getting back into writing, and I was in love at the time with Stephen King's Mr. Mercedes trilogy. And so I was like, you know what, I would have a lot of fun because I was a big Lee Childs fan growing up. I would have a lot of fun writing my own crime mystery. And I got into it with just the straight crime mystery, and it kind of bored me a little bit. I wanted something more. So I took a little bit of influence from Stir of Echoes with this haunting, if you will. And it was originally Rebekah's sister Nicole kind of guiding her through the case of her disappearance. And again, out of natural progression, I guess, I somehow made the logical choice, because what else would you do? Combine it with my fantasy story that I was working on all the way back in high school. And then instead of Nicole guiding her, it became this god trapped in her consciousness, and just a stream of other events, including her being pulled into that other realm and bringing elements of that other story all together into what it is now, which is kind of why it's an amalgamation. The consequence of being a pantser, I guess.
Why don't we know it? As
Yeah,
pantsers
right.
ourselves. But that's really cool how it all kind of like, melded together and made it what it is
Yeah.
now. Well, to kind of like elaborate on Rebecca and everything she's going through, how did you come up with a god imprisoned in her consciousness, and how does that affect her in like major ways or subtle ways? Like, you can tell us and like kind of elaborate on it.
I'll do my best. I if you can't tell, I kind of ramble about my book, even though the idea's been knocking around my noggin for a while. It's it's still kind of eludes me a little bit. But the idea of the God trapped in her consciousness, I'm not quite sure how that happened. It was just one of those things while I was writing, and it's like the lightning strike in your head, and I decided to roll with it. I was like, let's see where this path takes me. I don't know if this will work out or not, but I think it'd be kind of unique. So it just purely through evolution of the story coming together is kind of how that came in. However, from it, the idea immediately hit me that, hey, what if not only was this God trapped in his consciousness, in her consciousness, what if it was poisoning her? At first he's just kind of embedded in there. There's no link, there's no connection, but through the progression of the story, when she's pulled to that other realm, there are people that want to free this god. They need his help in this other realm, so they try to free him from her consciousness. And in doing so, they break this seal that not only connects the two minds together, they're now tethered, they can communicate with each other, and his power actually bleeds into her, and she can wield it in her own way. But on top of that, you know, her body can't handle the powers of a god just coursing through her, even though slowly, because it's just a small breach. So it's kind of poisoning her throughout the story, which is discovered, kind of near the end of Act Two. And then it becomes a thing like, can she, you know, conclude or get closure for what she's going through with her sister before all of this happens? Can she free this god from her body before her ultimate fate comes about? And so, yeah, it's just I just started walking a bunch of storylines in parallel, and I was like, this seems to be working so far. Let's just keep going with it.
The definition of pantsing. But it
That's
sounds
right.
so
Yeah.
cool. I don't want to say it reminds me because I haven't seen Venom, but I'm giving Venom kind of vibes. But it reminds me of something else where it's like taking them and I I, I don't know. The concept sounds cool, and I totally want to put this on my TBR. Um, well, what made you choose the elements in your book that you did? For example, why did you choose like the Reaper, the Armitage Hotel, and the Realm of Spirits?
So the original crime mystery, I was a big fan of the movie Identity, if you've ever seen that, which is where it's this mental patient, and he's kind of going through an interview because he was on trial for, I don't know what words I'm allowed to use on here, so we'll just go with he's unaliving people. But they discover that he actually has a slew of personalities in his own head, and one of those personalities is the killer. Um, and so through a series of psychological tests, they're kind of uh, weeding out the other personalities to discover which one is the killer, so they can get rid of that one and kind of set him free. But it's all played out in this motel during a storm, and you don't quite figure out that that's what they're doing until near the end of the movie. So if you haven't seen it, it's a little bit of a spoiler, but it also came out in the early 2000s. So, hopefully I'm not spoiling anything. But I was enamored with that idea. I like the whole hotels during a storm with a power outage. It's a cliche, but I kind of like it. So that element, I knew immediately when I was going to write a crime mystery that that was going to be something that I would do, because it was always a fear of mine. My family used to visit Virginia Beach every summer. I was like, that'd be cool to write a story of this hotel trapped in the storm, the beach kind of like climbing, or the ocean kind of climbing the beach, and that press for time kind of thing. But then, as far as the Reapers and the Gods, my original story that I was conceptualizing back in high school, I always liked this theory of, good versus evil, light versus dark. And so I liked the idea of these gods and Reapers kind of like battling it out or duking it out. So bringing that element into there kind of made sense to me in its own way.
Yeah, I really like seeing, as we've talked more and more, the inspiration and the kind of thinking behind each of the layers of your book. Like you mentioned, the hotel, while it's somewhat of a cliche, I also feel like it is a really useful set dressing because there are already emotions that kind of arise when you think of those types of things. So I think it's fun to take cliches sometimes and put our own, like, unique spin on it, because I think you add so much to the story around it that it really transforms it in its own way. So I think that that's really awesome. Why don't you tell us about what your favorite scene or dialogue is?
So I'm a big fan of a side character in the book. His name is Kevin Brindle. Niko Ortez's background is that he lost his family when he was a little bit younger, and he's kind of following in his father's footsteps, being the whole police thing. And a friend of his father's who worked with the FBI as well. His name is Kevin Brindle, and he kind of takes on that father figure type role. He's basically my Uncle Iroh insert from Avatar: The Last Airbender, that like wise guardian, if you will, kind of leading him through these problems. And I don't necessarily have a particular favorite quote from his, but if I had to pick one, it's near the beginning, probably the first chapter that these two are together. He basically kind of gives him some advice that's like you think everybody's focused on you, you think everybody's looking at you and out to get you. He's like, but really nobody gives a shit. They're all just living their own life, and so you need to stop thinking that all of these people are just focused intently on you, and you're overthinking that and whatnot. He puts it in a little bit more of a he's got that New York accent, so he's a little bit harsher with the delivery of that. But that's probably one of my favorite pieces of advice, because as somebody who has anxiety and is overcritical of himself, I constantly think that people are like staring at me, judging me, whatever, and that brings on a lot of the imposter syndrome that I face as a writer. That brings on a lot of like when I put things out, the fear of critique and judgment. And Brindle's kind of the guy that gives Niko the advice that I wish I had. And, I often kind of revisit that little conversation of theirs just for my own, pep talk, if you will.
As someone who also has anxiety, and Morgan, sorry to out you there, bud, but we both have anxiety and we both have been dealing with it for a long time. So I think we can absolutely relate to the idea of that. Tell us what the most difficult scene or dialogue was to write.
So within Nico's, I kind of alluded to his relationship drama and stuff like that. He has, they've been dating for 10 years, and there's a kind of critical moment between him and her father, and just kind of showing why they haven't taken that next step. This whole, father's not really approving, so on and so forth. And it hit a little hard because it was definitely pulled from my own life. It was more myself. It was like a conversation with myself. This overcritical. It's like, I don't know, this voice of reason being that father, and then Niko being myself, and just like this hypercritical moment, judgment, and it kind of hit a little hard. I was more or less talking to myself, like my inner critic talking to myself, and that was a difficult scene to get through. But it's still on par. There's a therapist scene with Rebekah where I do the same thing, because Rebekah and Niko are both kind of parts of me. Rebekah's 17 years old, and she kind of illustrates where I was at that time. Very unsure of myself, very anxious, very kind of outcast from everybody else. And Niko, being 24, is kind of where I was at, still still filled with self doubt, but kind of getting his life together. But the therapist that talks to Rebekah earlier on is very much that same thing. This, your thoughts are not right. You're a little crazy for thinking that. So those two scenes, that conflict between Niko and his girlfriend's father, and Rebekah with her therapist, are kind of done in very similar ways. They're very judgmental, very critical, and both of them were written as if to myself from my inner critic. So both of those were very difficult for me to get through.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how you have these experiences with anxiety, and it's almost like you are processing them and looking at them through a mirror, which is your writing. You mentioned earlier that he has that scene where it's like, hey, not everybody is judging you. That's your mind is getting carried away. So I think in that way, things we are trying to be self-aware about may end up in our writing without us purposely doing it, or we might be doing it intentionally to see what ends up on the other side and what kind of outcome we get at the end of the day. But I really like to see the ways that you have expressed yourself through your writing and expressed your own hardships and your own dealing with being your own harshest critic, and dealing with that is really admirable, I think.
In a way, I don't know if you guys have seen, there's a musician called Ren, and he's got this song called Hi Ren, where he's in a medical gown, he's sitting in a wheelchair playing guitar, and he's kind of arguing with himself. He has like this grady, kind of demonic voice for his inner critic, and then this kind of softer voice where he's like himself, kind of being gentle with himself. And in a way, I heard that song and I kind of broke down. I listened to it like 15 times and just struggled emotionally with it because it's a lot like what I did in my own writing. If you guys haven't checked out the song, I definitely recommend it because it's, for people with anxiety and that heavy inner critic, it speaks to you.
No, it sounds like a relatable song for sure between
Yeah.
us. um, well, which character gave you the most trouble as an author?
Uh, Definitely Brindle. As I said, he was my Uncle Iroh insert from Avatar: The Last Airbender. But he's really good with his advice. He gives the advice that you kind of want to hear, but a lot of the times, it's kind of hard to dredge that advice either from the ether where it comes from or from within yourself. So his parts were those like pants, or where I just left it in brackets, like come back to this and give yourself some good advice. Because a lot of the times when you're writing, it's hard to give yourself grace. So it's usually in the revisions that comes back, and you kind of think with a clearer head.
No, for sure. There's a lot of things that I put in brackets. I think that's just a really good writing advice as far as like I can't think of this now. I gotta come back to it and add it later so I don't interrupt the flow. Because you can't just pull out like Uncle Iroh-esque, dialogue out of thin air all the time. So I can understand the use of the brackets. Um,
It's a mindset. Yeah, you got to be in that mindset for it.
For sure. Well, how did you tackle the difficult topics in your books, such as grief, loss, and suicide? Because it seems like Rebekah has a pretty traumatic backstory. So, did you find this hard to write at all?
I did, primarily because I wanted to handle it with a little bit of sensitivity, if you will. I didn't, I mean, obviously, people that deal with grief know how heavy it can get, and I didn't want to cram that down people's throats. I wanted to try and give the perspective for maybe people who don't experience that stuff, maybe at all, or maybe not to as high of a degree. I wanted to give them a look into what people with that experience without, I don't know, being pompous about it. So I wanted to kind of carefully tread those waters, and I made sure I got sensitivity readers for multiple things. Dealing with the grief and the trauma, dealing with some of the content warnings that you would put in there, the trigger warnings. I wanted to make sure that that stuff was done in a way that is uncomfortable where it should be, um, but at least digestible so that the people can hear it, that they're not blocking it out. So it was primarily through beta readers, some people close to me, and then sensitivity readers. I leaned on those a lot, and that's how I kind of traveled my way through those topics.
Yeah, we've talked about sensitivity readers here before on the podcast, and we absolutely think they are an incredible resource. It just offers you the chance to double check your perspectives and see if maybe there's something you did unintentionally, or if maybe you were not so sensitive and that was your intention, was to be sensitive towards those things. So it's a really great way to have someone else take a look at your work with a certain mindset when they go into it of what they're looking for. So that's really great. I know that in my book, I deal with some really tough topics, so I can relate to the wanting to make it digestible, but also still giving the full experience. And it's almost like walking a tightrope, because you want to make sure that you're giving people enough that you're being authentic to the actual experience of like grief and loss and all those things, but you also don't want to overwhelm your readers, and it needs to be so where they're not walking away from your book feeling ultimately sad, unless that was like your big moment. But I totally understand the grace you have to learn.
Absolutely. Yeah, you don't want to get overly gratuitous, but you want to get that message across.
Yeah, yeah. So, Niko is a special agent. How did you blend the real world, him focusing on solving cold cases with evidence and fact, with the realms of spirits and otherworldly beings?
So that one was actually a lot easier than I thought it was going to be, and that was primarily just through using the multi POV kind of thing. Like, Niko is not privy to the things that Rebekah sees. The reader gets to see Rebekah's point of view, where she's dragged into the fantasy realm, where she's dealing with this heavy grief and depression that's manifested in her own mind. Whereas Niko, he's secluded from that. So keeping him secluded made it easy to kind of blend those things together. Rebekah's got her real world instances, and it's kind of unique because when Rebekah's dragged into the other realm while she's at the hotel, you know, she's just kind of, it's her consciousness that's traveled back. Her body's still there. So there's a scene where, Niko's pulled in. Hey, Rebekah's unconscious. We need somebody to look at her. And he just kind of sees her from the outside, experiencing what's happening in that world, and him just trying to find the logic to it. Oh, it looks like she's having a seizure. Or she's stiff as a board. She's sweating, stuff like that. So I think that adding those different points of view, what Rebekah's experiencing in her mind and in her other realm, and what Niko sees happening to her body, I think it paints this kind of picture where it's like the fantasy is really happening to her, but then Niko's that voice of reason that's like, no, 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 this is just a seizure, this is just this, or this is just that. So it's like that logic battling the reality of the situation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting balance between those two perspectives. I think it's really neat. I didn't know beforehand that Niko had no idea that any of this was happening to Rebekah. So I think that adds like a whole nother layer to the story that you are experiencing everything Rebekah's experiencing, which is not at all what Niko is experiencing, who has an entirely different perspective. And I think that can also be a little bit difficult to write too, because as the writer, there's so much that you know, but you're like, Niko doesn't know this. He has no idea what's going on. He just thinks she's having a seizure on the floor. So that's really interesting. Tell us a little bit more about you this time. What is your writing journey and what brought you to the writer that you are today?
Oh, my writing journey is just chaos incarnate. As I said, I'm a pantser. It's just kind of like I don't know. I think of it like Jim Carrey's Number 23, where it's just like things going on in my head, or even Sam Witwicky from Transformers 2, where it's just, oh, it's in my head now, it's on the walls kind of thing. So really the books are just my scribbling on the walls, and then after it's all out, it's good. I've got it organized now. I can kind of rearrange it. But that's how I started. It was a mess. And now I'm trying to be a little bit more organized because, especially with the second book, there's a lot more POVs, there's a lot more density to the plot. And so while I like my tactic of just chaos writing and discovery writing, it's not getting me to where I need to be for book two. So it's kind of forcing me to examine other tactics and, you know, read some writing help books or like writing guides or beat sheets or anything to kind of help me organize it. But, my big writing spurs still only come when I'm doing my discovery writing and just kind of doing this feverish, stream of consciousness, if you will.
Don't we know it? Yeah, as a pantser and discovery writer, it has been I mean, it actually taking publishing seriously has like changed the way I write, because I would also just like, let's see where it goes, and just type out whatever came to mind. And now I actually like, I make these little, I go to the dollar store, get these big poster boards, and I like just put a bunch of sticky notes of this happens, this happens, this happens. I learned it from an author on YouTube. And so then I slap that into NovelPad, which is the software I use. And, I can organize it in chapters and little scene cards and stuff. Um, and then if I don't like it, NovelPad's really cool where I can just drag and drop the chapters around and go, well, I don't feel like having this happen here. How about it happen up here? So I highly recommend NovelPad for your organizing needs. But that's really awesome that now, we're all pivoting with our publishing stuff. Um, so, like, when you do enter the stream of consciousness, is there any thing that you do, kind of a routine, music that you listen to? Tell us about that.
I'm kind of a mood writer, if you will. Um, I haven't nailed down what my exact recipe is. It seems to change all the time. Sometimes I just wake up and I don't know, there was this dream I had, and all of a sudden I'm feeling very witty and clever, and it makes the writing just flow through me so much better. Um, but sometimes I'm in this block and I'll just put on a song and it'll go through like the related songs, if you will. It'll kind of guide me down that road. And I'll just hit this song where I'm just driving and I've zoned out and the song is just kind of speaking through me and hits me in a certain way. I'm like, wow, that's really great. And that sparks that creativity. But then I'll try that song again later when I'm in my block and I'm like specifically looking for it. And it doesn't quite hit the same. So I haven't discovered the recipe. I haven't nailed it down. I'm trying to, because that would make the writing so much easier. But yeah, right now it just seems like randomness that just brings about, whatever creative spark I need.
I mean, and part of the adventure is figuring out. I mean, and sometimes the freaking routine changes. Like, usually I want to be on a comfy bed and have a candle on, but sometimes there's no time for that, and I just need to get some kind of something on the page, and I need to sit at my desk and at least, pound some words out. Um, so, I mean, it can always change every day anyway. Well, Atlas, what are your publishing plans for the future, and what's ahead for your series?
I'd like to finish. I plan for 3 books in this, potentially 4. It depends on how heavy into the lore of the world that I was conceptualizing back in high school gets. I would like to finish this series, and then I have a couple other ideas for different genres. But also, I've pitched in for a few short stories as contributions to anthologies. So I've got one of them that's a sci-fi short story coming out as part of an anthology that comes out at the end of this month, so Halloween Day. There's like 21 TikTok authors that were part of this, organized by Christian Francis, and I'm really excited for that one to come out. I've just finished up my first spicy romance, if you want to call it that. My beta reader gave me 2 spicy peppers on that, which felt pretty good. But I'm really calling it a rom com because that's what I know how to write, and that's kind of how I approach it. And then I'm working on another sci-fi one for an anthology that should come out late next year. So those are like my experiments with these different genres that I want to explore. And in the meantime, I'm just trying to finish up my 3 book series, the Children of Arcanum series, and see what happens after that, which story I'm feeling the most.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting way to make your journey towards finding what genre works best for you more fun, because you get to kind of dip your toes in each and see what sticks and see what brings out the passion in you. So that's really awesome. What made you choose indie publishing over traditional publishing?
So when I first finished my book, or was at least close enough, I was kind of going through the editing process and the beta reading process. I started out querying agents and looking into query letters and what to do, what not to do, all of that stuff. And I pitched out, I think, probably about 30 to 40 query letters. And I don't know, it was like maybe a week after I pitched them out, I started doing more research because my big thing was I wanted somebody to help me with the marketing. And I started hearing more rumors that as a new, relatively unknown author, you're still going to be doing a lot of marketing yourself. It's still going to be a heavy hand of your own marketing, and they may pitch in a little bit, but their budget is going to go towards their preferred authors, the ones that are guaranteed to bring them in money, so on and so forth. So I was like, well, if I'm going to be doing the marketing myself, and that's really my only Achilles heel, why not just practice my hand at that? So I decided, okay, before I even got any rejections or any responses or anything, I was like, let me just try this because I think that self-publishing is a very open path. It's a lot of possibilities at my feet, and I can kind of control everything. I can hand out books for free if I want to. I can experiment a little bit with marketing tactics, which I've been doing a little bit on TikTok right now. Some successful, some not so much. And the onus is on me, and I don't have to worry about anybody else, contributing to that success or anything like that. The onus is entirely on me, and there's a level of I think, responsibility that that gave me to push me a little bit harder to do some stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I think you're right that indie publishing is more open, and there's a kind of a realm of possibilities that you can, dip into. There's so many different tactics when it comes to marketing. There are some people who frankly don't market at all, but they focus on just getting out as many books as possible, and through word of mouth, that's their marketing. And there's just so many different approaches, and if you're okay with different levels of growth and exposure to your book, it's completely customizable, because not everybody prioritizes selling the most books now, but then some people, what they do prioritize is finding the most readers now. And like you said, you can give out your book for free if you want to, if what's important to you is just finding your readers and finding people who enjoy reading your book. So I really love that. And now I want to ask you our favorite question here on the podcast, which is, what does indie publishing mean to you?
Indie publishing to me means freedom. I mean, you get to make your own decisions. You get a sense of pride. You get a sense of responsibility. And at the end of the day, for better or for worse, whatever your expectations are, you get a sense of accomplishment. If nothing else, you're like, I now know this market. I know the publishing field. I know how to hunt down cover designers. I know how to hunt down audiobook narrators, whatever your path may be. And to me, there's a sense of pride. When I first started my TikTok journey, if you will, I got on right when there was this kind of attack on indie authors by a pretty well-known author, and there was a lot of it going around like, oh, doing indie publishing is taking the easy way out. And I was just in, like, foot in the door for the research, and I could already see, I'm like, this is not the easy way out. I traditional publishing, yeah, there's a bar for entry, and once you get past that bar, it's easier for the author after that. Yeah, you're doing a lot of your own marketing, but you have a team of people to help you. You have a team of, editors, beta readers, stuff like that. That's a little bit more accessible to you. And not to say that that's the easy way. I think both ways are exceptionally challenging. But to say that indie publishing is the easy way out, when you have to build your team of beta readers, you have to find your cover designers and make sure they're not scamming you, or nowadays make sure they're not using AI or anything like that. You kind of have to vet all of these people on your own. So there's a different level of difficulty, but you get the freedom to kind of make those mistakes, or find those successes. And I think there's a certain kind of poetry in that. There's a certain kind of beauty in going down that path on your own, especially if it turns out to be successful. You can be like, I did that entirely myself. I built this.
100%. I always now that my book is out, I always crank was that the Post Malone song that's like I did it, and it is like uh it's surreal to like be able to say that your book is on Amazon or on Barnes and Noble and indie like bookstore chains and stuff, that it just exists, and it's super cool. And to be able to have that, and to be able to do it again, because now I've done it and I can do it again. So now that, we learn all these things and also have the freedom to do so, I completely agree. Well, if we can pick your brain, Atlas, you've done a couple or a few book events. What advice do you have for other authors who are interested in doing book events?
First off, for that, I think if you're kind of on the fence about book events, absolutely give it a shot. I know that it's not everybody's cup of tea. The social environment of book signings and conventions can be a little overwhelming. So, try and find something smaller if that's more comfortable for you. But I highly recommend it, just because the relationships you build with readers, bar none, probably the best things that I've ever done. I actually have a story kind of related to that. Is when I did my second Barnes and Noble signing, um, at another location. It was the first one I did after my book was published, but the first one I did was like a pre-release 2 weeks before release. So the first one that I did after my actual publication, I ran into a family that came into the store, and I, did my typical greeting, nothing pushy, just to get their attention. Hey, how are you guys? Can I interest you in a paranormal thriller? That kind of thing. They went off, they explored the store, but then on their way back, they did stop by. They're like, hey, I did want to stop by before, we left, check out your book, and they decided to buy it. And 3 days later, uh, I got a review. Now, when they were there, when the wife was going to buy the book, I was talking to the husband, what kind of books do you read, that kind of stuff. And he was like, I don't really read. I was like, oh, that's okay. Not everybody reads, and that's perfectly fine. But I guess he decided to pick up my book. And so 3 days later, I got this review from him saying that, I kind of converted him. He was like, he sounded interested in the idea and he picked it up and he was like, it was a lot more than I was expecting. It was a blend of crime, mystery, paranormal thriller, dark urban fantasy, stuff like that. He's like, and I just was constantly on my toes. He's like, so now I'm a reader. I'm asking my wife what other books I can do. And so just from that signing event alone and that experience alone was kind of what sold me. I was like, I'm not going to get this from an online interaction. I might, but seeing that in person and now I have a face to it and I have that, interaction that I can lean back on. I highly recommend it. Got off track a little bit, but sorry, steer myself back on.
Oh,
As far as advice, I highly recommend experimenting with your table setup. Your table should do a lot of the selling for you. Whether you decide to do like the little laminated stand-up posters, kind of pitching your book, maybe a blurb or something like that. Definitely include your prices. Always include a QR code to your website, to your social media links, so on and so forth. And don't be afraid to kind of, as people are passing by your table, or even if they're just kind of like idly browsing your table, make a conversation with them. It doesn't have to be about your book. It can be maybe about the shirt that they're wearing or something that they're carrying if you also have an interest in that. A lot of people at conventions will walk by wearing a shirt of a band or a movie or a TV show that I'm interested in, and I'll just start the conversation that way. And also, don't be afraid to experiment a little bit. Um, I had a slow moment recently at Baltimore Comic Con where, I mean, there weren't many people walking by my table, so I thought I'd try being a little self-deprecating. I've had people tell me, "It's like you need to stop being so self-deprecating about your work." I was like, "Well, let me just lean into it. That's kind of my shtick." So as people were walking by, I would just say, "Hey, can I introduce you in 376 blank pages, or do you need a new door stop, or started calling it a multi-purpose tool. I was like, it's a good paperweight. It's a beautiful doorstop, and when you're done with it, it's kindling for a fire. However you want to do it. If you get bored, you can read it. And a lot of people that were just idly walking by, I'd kind of strike up that little humorous jab at myself. They'd laugh and they'd be like, "All right, tell me about your book." And so that kind of drew them into the table. So don't be afraid to experiment with whatever fits your personality, with whatever you think might draw in your audience, the people that you would want to bring in to your book's world, or so on and so forth.
for
Sorry,
sure.
big ramble, but hopefully that
No,
answered the
I
question.
think because first of all, I love that story about the guy that left the review for you, and like it was like he got into reading that way. Uh, that's amazing, and I think everything that you just said really hones in the biggest advice. Like it's the fact that readers can connect with you in person and like find this connection, it helps them remember you and your book, and it makes it like such a great experience for them, and they're more likely to make a purchase, or at least remember you, so that later on they're like, oh, this author's on got their books on Amazon, or whatever. um, and even as your career grows, they can follow you on your socials, or like whatever they feel like they're most connected with. So, no, I think that's all of that is awesome. So, I guess we do have to get out of our anxious, introverted ways and settle into speaking with people. Um, but I do like those tidbits so much. Um, are what are your biggest obstacles when it comes to actually publishing your book? Like after they're written, is there anything like you encountered through the publishing process?
Yeah, templates are a pain in the ass. You get your PDF set up for your EPUB or for the interior of your book or even the exterior of your book, and like the slightest mishap, it'll give you that little red flag. But I think the biggest hurdle for me was experimenting on how I want to distribute. Like Amazon's a big platform for authors; it also has the highest royalties. But I also wanted to be able to do Barnes and Noble book signings, and to do that, you have to be into a wider distribution database. I looked into Draft to Digital. I looked into Ingram Spark. I primarily went with Ingram Spark because it was familiar to me. But then I also still wanted those royalties. So I dual published. And initially, I put my ebook and paperback on both Ingram Spark and on Amazon. And then I think it was like 3 months in, I discovered that almost all of my ebook purchases were Amazon. I was getting nothing through the wider distribution platforms, nothing through Nook or Barnes and Noble. But I was also missing out on opportunities like getting the Kindle Unlimited page reads, which can draw in its own audience, as well as these Stuff Your Kindle Day events, which I just completed one, my first one, since putting my book on Amazon. So yeah, that's what I did. I pulled my ebook from Ingram Spark, waited for it to completely be out of the other distributor systems. I emailed Amazon to make sure, like, hey, I was in Ingram Spark. I want to make sure this isn't going to cause any complications. They told me it wasn't. I'm a very untrusting person, so I screenshotted the chat with the agent to say, no, like, if you take my book down, I'm like, no, he said it's right here, I got it in text. But yeah, no, I put it up there on Kindle Unlimited. I haven't had a problem since then, and participating in my first Stuff Your Kindle Day was a big success. I think I gave away like 3,600 plus copies, and while they are free, I don't make any money off of that. It's still 3,600 copies of my book that's out there in the hands of readers who hopefully enjoy it. So that's better marketing than you can get anywhere.
Yeah, I share a nearly identical story because I also had mine on Amazon and on Ingram, and it was just not moving at all on Ingram for the ebook. And so I was like, well, I really want to be in this Stuff Your Kindle. So I took my book down and put it up on KU. And actually, what's really interesting is since Stuff Your Kindle has ended, a lot of people are reading it actually on KU right now. And so I'm getting page
Yeah.
reads and I'm getting money from that. So that was really exciting and to see, that it would pay off. And I know everyone says, well, they're just free copies, but I've actually seen my people who want to read on Goodreads has gone up. I did get one new 4-star review, which is amazing, from someone who like read it in 2 or 3 days and left me a review, which was amazing. So there can be a lot of benefits from that. It also sounds like you did a lot of research and you learned a lot along the way. So what is your best piece of advice for people who want to self-publish that you wish you had known ahead of time?
Oh, so I'm going to start this out by, because everything's case by case. There is no one size fits all solution for publishing for anybody. So I'm going to give the advice that I almost always ended my videos with is do your own research to the best of your own ability. And that comes to not just writing the story, but marketing, publishing, whatever. Find the path that works best for your individual style. Because everybody will give you answers, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll work the same for you. But something that I do wish that I knew ahead of time um, was keywords. And I'm still struggling my way through keywords and just in general, all of the metadata. Ingram Spark is really nice. Again, when I was early on TikTok, there was somebody talking about how limiting and restrictive KDP's keywords are because you only get 7 lines. Granted, you can put multiple words in those lines, but it's still very restrictive. Whereas Ingram Spark, it's sky's the limit. Keep going, as many keywords as you want. However, I thought if I just crammed as many keywords in there as I could, that would get me places. And I started quickly finding out that it does not point my book in all the directions that I was hoping it would. So that's a big learning curve for me is just the keywords you put in your metadata around your book and with your ISBN and how it, shuffles you through the system. That's something I wish I had a little bit more knowledge on before I entered publishing.
Yeah, there are so many aspects of trying to market your book that do not come easily, and they are not written out in plain English for you somewhere on the internet to just read. And even if it is, it's somehow still confusing, and somehow you'll still encounter something going wrong. So, to kind of continue on that, or to maybe flip it, what's one thing that you wish came easier for you, or what's one thing that you excel at naturally when it comes to the whole self publishing sphere?
I, I'll try and answer both if that's okay.
Yeah.
Um, I think that something that comes naturally for me is, as you can see, just even in this podcast interview, is I tend to ramble. I have no problem running my mouth, even if it's nonsense. So I think that a natural ability comes there. So that's what makes conventions and signings a little bit easier for me because I could just talk, I can approach people. As difficult as it is for me, because I mean, internally, I'm sweating my ass off. Pardon my French. Internally, I'm sweating, just like beads of sweat. But something that I wish did come easier is I want to say writing, but I feel like I'm also a good writer. It's just, again, it's the mindset. I have to be in that mindset. And if I'm not, I'm super critical on my writing. As I talked about earlier, I'm super critical on myself. So I wish that maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was better at giving myself grace and accepting that my first pass of writing is not going to be perfect. So that way I could kind of dial back the OCD and write the story a little bit quicker.
For sure. I mean, that imposter syndrome and that internal critic is something you have to, unfortunately, um, not, I mean, yeah, you kind of have to live with it, but also, counteract it. Because me and Jade were, I think we were just like chatting about, drafting, our books in our series and being like, dear God, why does this word like, oh, it's so bad, and this sentence is like, oh God, I just want it to be. But then we were like, there's time to edit it later, and we can change and add things later. Because my writing, it's just dialogue, straight up action, and it's just boom, 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 and I'm like, God, yeah, because I know my editor's just gonna say, just put more emotions in there, Morgan, because I'm terrible at that. But and I'm like, oh, they need more emotions. Like, no, you can put it in later. We've done this before. There's different processes and different steps in the editing that you can do and take. So, I mean, if that helps you, feel free to let me know. But yeah, it is a struggle for sure. Um, Atlas, as we wrap it up here, are there any future goals or upcoming events and releases, anything you want to let us know about?
Sure. So, like I said, there is an anthology that I'm part of. Again, 21 TikTok authors. I say TikTok authors, they're all everywhere, but we all met on TikTok, and it was handled by Christian Francis. That's coming out. The theme of it is the last day, either alive or the last day as this person, maybe a transformative event to their new life or, better circumstances or something. But it's all related to the last day of something, and all the proceeds of that go to charity. So, it's really just a way for authors to get out there, experiment with a new style, and kind of introduce themselves in large scale to a different audience. I've got another one that's the rom com. I'll give you just a little teaser on that because that doesn't come out until February 2025, I believe, is still the date. But that one starts out. It's all Shrek based,
Ooh.
and I got the Pied Piper. I got the Pied Piper, and so I kind of had fun playing with that character who can't talk and communicates through music, through his flute, and so on and so forth. But it also starts out with a very pun-filled event of him performing fellatio on himself. If there's any better way to open up a story, I don't know one. That should be coming out in February 2025. I am hoping that book 2 of Children of Arcanum comes out in June of next year. I'm pushing for it, but at the same time, I'm only about halfway through it, so we'll see. I'm being ambitious. And then, of course, I've got that third anthology story. As far as events, I'm done for this year, but I do have quite a few coming up for next year, as well as my first out of state convention. So I'm doing A Million Lives in Baltimore, Maryland. I'm very excited for that. There's a lot of TikTok people that are going there that I'm excited to meet. There's the Tennessee LitCon that's happening September of next year, and that one's massive. There's a lot of narrators, a lot of authors that I'm very close with that are going to be there, and I'm super excited for it. And then, yeah, I keep my website updated with most of them. So by all means, check out atlascreedauthor.com, and it's a little down the page, but yeah.
Yeah, because I know people are definitely going to want to find you after this episode. Can you remind everyone of your social media handles and where they can buy your book?
Absolutely. So pretty much everywhere on social media, it's Atlas_Creed. But also, again, if that's too hard to find, or if you can't find me there, because some of the ones are a little bit different, atlascreedauthor.com. I've got all my social media at the top as well as the bottom. You just click it, it'll take you there. And I pretty much keep my website as up to date as possible. I do have a newsletter on Substack that I post to infrequently, but I'm trying to get better about that. TikTok and Instagram are where I'm the most active. So find me on there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much to Atlas Creed for being here with us for an amazing interview. Next week, you'll be able to catch Aria Lockley, author of Shadows in Bloom, here on the Indie Book Nerds podcast.